Welcome to the Outlier's Journey, where we'll explore the human stories of inspiring paths to success in the African American and Caribbean immigrant communities. My name is John Seaton, and I've always been fascinated with folks who manage to overcome adversity and somehow achieve success despite the odds. With these stories, I hope to enlighten and inspire others, especially those listening that may find themselves in a similar circumstance. So let's get started. Today, I want to welcome Vinaya Springer to the podcast. We will explore Vinaya's journey as an Air Force military brat, born in Vegas, raised in the 757, specifically Newport News, Virginia. Based on my conversations with Vinaya, the 757 was no joke. It was not an easy or safe place to grow up. She also spent a lot of time in New Orleans during the summer with her extended family. We'll follow her journey all the way to Cisco in her current role as the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Premier Accounts. Those are the largest, most strategic accounts at Cisco. We will learn how Vinaya managed to overcome significant adversity, which gave her the strength and determination she needed to successfully compete as she entered her technical career while maintaining her authenticity. Vinaya has her Bachelor's of Science in Electrical, Electronics, and Communications Engineering from North Carolina A&T University, and her MBA in Information Technology from the University of Maryland. So with that, Vinaya, welcome to the podcast. Hopefully I got all that right.
You did, man. I got to ask you to pre-record that again and send it to me so that way when people ask me, for a quick bio, I'm just going to send them, that quick little 5-10 second intro. But good morning, man. I appreciate being here. I appreciate the invite. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, same here, no doubt. So as you know, I always like to begin with the here and now, and then we'll circle back to where it all started to explore your journey to how you got to where you are here now. So can you just give us a little summary about yourself, your work, family life, where you're living right now?
Yeah, no problem. So as you said, I'm a senior leader here at Cisco, aligned to our premier accounts within enterprise space. So predominantly my organization, or my squad, as I like to call them, engineer organization, is made up of roughly around 20-25 architects, engineers across the board with wide range of experience within the technology industry, supporting a large global financials. Where I am now as well is it's me and my partner, Selena. We live in the DMV area, predominantly living in the Greenbelt, Maryland area. So, as you mentioned in the intro, I got my MBA from College Park. I live literally around the corner from College Park, and it's been good thus far. It's just me, her, and our 2-year-old French bulldog. My heart's out to anyone who's a French bulldog owner.
Sister had one.
Someone should have warned me.
Yeah, they're a powerhouse.
they are.
Yeah, so just so people know, the DMV is the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, right?
It is, and I appreciate you clarifying that, because oftentimes you hear DMV, you're like, so the car place? I'm like, no,
yeah, you're going to get your car inspected?
DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
So I would say, and the reason I bring people like yourself on, Vinaya, is you've reached a level of success. And we define success in the traditional sense, right? You've got a nice career, you've got a nice relationship, you got a dog. But I always like to ask people, what is your definition of success?
That's a good question, John. Success in my eyes is probably never going to be defined properly until I can no longer do what it is that is called life anymore. I think that when I want to say to age 25, 26, I had a situation that transpired where I nearly lost my life. I was in a really bad car accident, and life after that, I always think the big guy upstairs every time a birthday comes around, because 25, 26, that was supposed to be it. And so at that period of time, I said to myself, I'm never going to try to define things until it's done, until it's it. So where I am in this period of time, what defines success to me is my ability to see others thrive and be successful. I thrive off of other people's success. I thrive off of seeing people grow that I've coached, that I've mentored, that I've led. So that's what success looks like to me. Success is not materialistic.
Yeah. So you get your energy from seeing others be successful. So you're passing that success on. So I really admire that definition. That's a fantastic definition. And certainly being in a car accident at a young age like that puts the rest of your life into perspective, I would imagine.
It definitely does, man. It's nothing like being hit by two tractor trailers,
Oh my goodness.
and being spun out on the highway. And the only thing you walk away with is a couple of scratches and a couple of bruises, but your car's totaled, right? And everyone who's stopping on the highway is looking to see where the driver is, and you're the driver, and they're in disbelief that you're able to walk away from that. There's a mark on your life that means that if you're able to walk away from this, there's so much more that God has for you to go out there and do. So I just never, after that, took anything for granted.
So certainly one of the turning points in your life. And as we go through this conversation, believe me, there are many. Let's start with where your journey began. So tell me a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up.
Yeah. So whenever I have to answer the question of where I'm born, I always tell people, please just hear me out before you ask questions or you make assumptions. But I was born in Las Vegas. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. There's an Air Force base out there in Nevada that both my parents actually were stationed at. Both my parents are from the South. One's from Mississippi and one's from Louisiana, in particular New Orleans. And so, there's so many different places that you in the United States of America would want to be born in. But I don't shy away from it. I think it's actually pretty cool to say you're from Las Vegas, Nevada, because there's always a story that's
Yeah,
associated
certainly
with that.
a conversation starter, right?
It definitely is a conversation starter. But like I said, my parents being in the military, we moved around quite a bit. Spent a part of my childhood in Austin, Texas. Spent a part of my childhood in San Bernardino, California. Spent a part of my childhood in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then the bulk of my childhood into teenage and young adult was in part still is Newport News, Virginia. And so the 757, as you mentioned at the beginning, is where I'm from. And I don't shy away from mentioning that as well, because to your point, there's always a story behind the story when it comes down to certain things.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research on the 757 because the first time you mentioned that to me, I had no idea. I had never heard that term before. And I guess it consists of 7 cities of Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Suffolk, and Virginia Beach. About
Mm-hmm.
2 million people. They say it's primarily army bases, shipyards, and bush gardens. Right?
In Busch Gardens, yes.
So it sounded like you moved around a lot in your earlier age. Did that affect you in any way? Did you gain strength for that? Was that something you learned something from?
Yeah, so I think that oftentimes when you hear that someone's a military brat or they're a part of a military family, you automatically assume a couple of things. One of the things that you can assume about me that's true is yes, we moved around, right? And that's not something that coming into this world you sign up for. It's something that's just part of the territory.
Yeah.
I think that for me, however, being raised and being raised by two very strong minded African American people, it allowed me to adapt. And then also just my personality. I will talk to anyone. I will network with anyone, albeit, you don't know what the word networking means at a young age. You're just calling it making friends. And that's what I did. There's rec centers on every Air Force base that if your parents are active military, you get a free membership to. So me and my older sister would always go to these recreation centers and lounges. And that's where you would go after school until your parents were off. They would come pick you up. And then you go home and you rinse and repeat. And so for me, I always found joy and peace in the recreation centers because I was around people who knew, the life, that understood the life, that Understood. It's better to try to adapt and get to know different people and personalities versus not, because the time that you have here may be short and you may be on to the next destination. I tried to find the joy and I tried to find something that made me happy about that place.
So it made you
um
very adaptable, I guess.
exactly.
So let's get into two places that I know are very important and influential in how you grew up. One is Newport News, obviously. And you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about that. What type of place was Newport News? And then I want to get into New Orleans, right? And
Mhm.
what part that played in your life.
Yeah. So I think Newport News for me is about overcoming and being the underdog, right? I don't you don't hear a lot about people coming out of Newport News unless, they're a celebrity like a Missy Elliott, a Pharrell Williams, and an Allen Iverson, a Michael Vick, people who are either musicians, artists, or people who are athletes, right? You don't hear about the Jefferson Lab. You don't hear about, NASA. You don't hear about all the great things that Hampton University is doing for the 757 and African Americans and people of color, right? You don't hear about those things. You hear about, the crime rate. You hear about, different things around poverty. You hear about, unfortunately, things like gangs and all those different things. You don't really hear, when I was growing up, the positives. I think for me, when I think about Newport News, I think about the good, the bad, and the
Yep.
indifference. Our parents wanted to put us in private schools, right? They wanted to put us in to situations that they felt were going to give us the best option, from an education perspective, that we're going to put us in the best situation to march further ahead, right? And so that's exactly what my parents did. Me and my sister were in the Catholic school system, the private school system, for me all the way up until third grade. I think that private schools and Catholic schools for Black kids, you're naturally walking into a situation that you are not sure you understand. You can look to your left and you can look to your right, and you can see maybe someone else that looks like you, maybe
Right.
two,
Right.
but it ain't a classroom of yous, right? It's a classroom where you truly feel like you are the minority without even knowing what the word minority means.
So 757 sounds like it was a place of adoption and adaption, rather, and a little bit of an underdog. And there was, as you said, the first 48. So there was a little bit of crime there, et cetera. New Orleans was special to you. And
Mhm.
I don't want to leave that because it plays a pivotal part in your story. So tell me, what was your tie to New Orleans?
Yeah, so my like I said, my mom's side of the family is from New Orleans. New Orleans, like all the other places that we lived in growing up, New Orleans played a special role in that, because whenever my parents were traveling or TDY, that was where we went. I hated when my dad or my mom would drop us off at school, because in that situation, yeah, assumption number three about military kids is that it's always a hard time when you are departing from your parents. And so
Yeah.
for me, that was tough. Give it a couple of days, I would rebound and regroup and keep it moving. And so New Orleans, because of such, played a pivotal role because of family. Summertime would come around, we would stay for the entire summer. And so that was a lasting memory and a lasting situation all the way up to eighth grade. Eighth grade, I started playing organized basketball. And so I had to hang up the going to grandma's house, every summer, because I wanted to take a different direction
Yeah.
with, what I was doing. But yeah, man, New Orleans is special because of such. It was home, it was peace.
Yeah. So that gave you a sense of home base
Yes.
in New Orleans. So that was a good evening factor, if you will.
Yes.
And when you talked about Mardi Gras and the smell of seafood and gumbo and fish fry,
Man, you don't start, John. Don't start. Yes, but what's interesting about that, just a little quick story on that. So we would go to Mardi Gras as kids, every single year. I think that was something in particular for my mother, that this is gonna be a tradition, right? Regardless of where we are in the world, this is gonna be a tradition. So king cake, I remember always
oh
my,
yeah,
my grandmother would get me a special, like a big one. And she would just say, baby, you got to dig for it. You got to dig for it. And I would dig and dig and dig until I found a little baby in there, and I would collect those. We would go to the Mardi Gras parades and collect a bunch of beads and stuff. And then we would package it up so that way, wherever we went, we would keep those things. And so to this day, I still have a couple of things. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I still have a couple of things from Mardi Gras when I was a child. It's
Yeah.
it's always gonna be a special, near and dear place to me.
So at a high level right now, what I'm getting from your story, Vinaya, is you had some parents who really stressed education. So they moved around a lot and they still tried to give you a home base in New Orleans. Yes, the 757 had some challenges. You had to move around a lot, but that probably gave you a little bit of adaptability and personal strength and being able to adjust. So now let's talk a little bit about your experience in school.
Yeah.
So your parents obviously saw the value of education, so they initially sent you to Catholic school. Uh, but it sounds like maybe, well, tell me about that. How did that go?
I, as a young child, was very self aware. When you're in a classroom and it's just you, or you are the only or one of two onlys in that classroom, which, transpired many of times, not only as a child, but also as an adult, it makes you think about the competition, right? It makes you think
Yeah,
about being competitive. It makes you think about, what, my hand's always going to be raised. I'm always going to be called on. I'm going to have the answers to the test. And if I don't have the answers, I'm going to go home and study as hard as I can because you're not going to outdo me. And the key emphasis on, well, Vinaya, who are you talking about when you say you're? And for me, it was always people of different races and primarily white. And so when you are amongst other children, predominantly white children, and you're being raised and taught that you've got to go above and beyond, you've got to give 110%.
yeah,
You may not know what any of this means right now, but when it's time to show up, which is what my mother always says, you better show up and you better perform. And so school for me was that ground for it, and I became so accustomed to that education wasn't something that I ran away from. It was something that I ran to. It was like New Orleans, it was kind of a piece, which is crazy to say. I enjoyed learning and I enjoyed growing. Now, what I will say is that in the midst of enjoying growing and learning, there's always those pivotal things that transpire in regards to such. And one situation, again, the fact that you know nothing different besides growing up in a private school system within, the Catholic school system, you don't know what public school life is about, right? You see kids at bus stops and they're playing football and doing all these different things, and they're wearing different clothes, regular
yeah,
clothes, and then there's you who's showing up to the bus stop in this uniform, wearing the same, couple pair of shoes or sneakers, whatever the
yeah,
case is, because you've got to fit within a certain,
yeah.
type of profile. School bus that you ride in is not the same as the school bus that they ride in. And so automatically there's that aspect of it. You get
Yeah,
on the school bus.
I did 8 years in blue slacks, white shirt, blue tie.
See, man, and it's something that you become so accustomed to that if you ever do transition out of that and you go into, the public school system, you're like, so I got to put a outfit together. I got to
Right. You
do
got to
this,
think
that, and
every
third.
morning.
But yeah, man, my first experience, I would probably say, which really kind of changed the course for me from a child perspective, was we were going to this school in Hampton. So school bus would pick us up from Newport News. It would take us to Hampton. It was a situation where you get on a school bus and kids are looking at you and knowing that you don't look like them, and in the back of their minds you're thinking, what are you thinking about me? And in back of my minds they're probably thinking, well, what do you think about me, right? And so
Right.
there was naturally that tension. And again, as children, you don't know what tension is, but there was kind of that tension in the air all the way down to the school bus driver, and so it wouldn't be a hi, it wouldn't be a good morning. It would just be, get on the bus. You get on the bus, no one wanted to sit by you, no one wanted to offer you a seat. That whole, seats taken. That's exactly kind of
Oh
how
yeah.
it was. And so me and my sister always sat in the back of the bus.
Wow.
We didn't question it. We didn't ask anything about it. That's just naturally what we did. When we got to school, we always wanted to be at the front of the class, but there was never any seats at the front of the class, so you always had to sit in the back of the class or the middle. And so naturally, again, there's certain dynamics that are starting to build that you don't even recognize are building up around you. You have no idea that what the synopsis of sitting at the back of the bus and being black means, right? You have no
You
idea.
didn't know, and you didn't know any different, right?
You had no idea, you didn't know any different. You just thought that was just a way of life. And so anyways, we get on the bus, we sit in the back of the bus. And this happened, quite frequently. It happened a lot. It happened actually every single day. You get to school, no one wants to talk to you, no one wants to play with you. And that was different. That was absolutely different than any other public school, private school that we had been to. So
Right.
for us, it was a struggle. It was more of a struggle for my sister than it was for me, because for me, again, I went back to education. You don't have to like me. You don't have to love me, but you will respect me in regards to what I bring to the table and my knowledge. And that's how I always carried myself. My sister was the same way, but my sister being a bit older and her starting to come into her own, she wanted to have friendships, long lasting friendships. She wanted to do the things that a normal preteen at that period of time wanted to do, but in the environment that we were in, she couldn't. And so we're getting on the bus, we're going home, and this day, that I'm referencing is not like any other day, because this day, what usually happened on the bus, kids would pick at us, kids would say, little things here and there, and then the bus driver would interfere, and that would be it, right? And so it became a thing. But this situation was pivotal. We were actually sitting at the front of the bus, and go figure, you're sitting at the front of the bus. There's bound to be something that happens. Me and my sister actually got on the bus first. Me and her both were just like, hey, if we're gonna get off the bus first, if we're gonna be the first
Right.
stop, let's just sit in the front. We sat in the front. A couple of kids sat behind us, and one little girl in particular just kept picking and picking John at my sister. And I'm looking at her, and I'm telling the little girl to stop, and little girl keeps going. And I'm looking at the bus driver, I'm looking at my sister, and my sister just has this look, John. And she has this look
Mm.
like it's about to go down.
Yeah.
And it did. It
Yeah.
did. My
Yeah.
sister turns around, she hauls off and hits the little girl. The bus driver stops the bus, she pulls over, and you would think that she, would not condone what happened, from both individuals, but actually it was my sister who got in trouble.
Yeah.
They called, the school. We drove. They had to take us back to the school, dropped us off, called our parents. My mom comes up there, and my mom is just like, what happened? So we're telling her what happened. My mom quickly, pauses us, goes inside, talks to the administrator. They have a couple of words and exchanges, and comes back out and, and says, at that period of time, you guys are no longer coming back here. I should have listened to you when you were telling me in regards to the environment, in regards to the situation. Next day, we enrolled in public school and never looked
So your
back
mother
since.
pulled you out.
She did. She
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
She did. It was I'm thankful. I'll be completely honest with you. I think that where I was within just growing up, but in particular where my sister was growing, in regards to growing up, I think that it had to happen. We needed to be engulfed and enriched in different experiences in regards to our community and environment. And, being brought up in Virginia, Virginia is different. I'm not even going to lie. Virginia, there is a clear delineation between who has what and who doesn't. I think in that particular situation, we were made to feel like we truly were part of the minority. And the
Yeah.
school system, made us feel that way. The bus driver made us feel that way. So it was a pivotal situation that there's no regrets from, because we were then enrolled in public school. Public school for me growing up, it was different because I was always a step ahead. right? And I know me and you were chatting about this and the education that comes with being in a private school system and a public school system. Private school system, teaches you at an accelerated mode versus most public schools. And elementary and middle school, that's always the nature. I was always a level ahead or a grade ahead, whether it was reading, writing, math, science, you name it. And so I had to have certain curriculum that was made specifically for me. Growing up in Virginia, Virginia had a law back then that you had to be a certain age in order to be able to test out. I did not meet that age requirement. I was always a year behind age wise. So if you were supposed to be 9, I was 8. If you're supposed to be 10,
Right.
I was 9, right? And so as a result of such, my mom, was adamant on testing out. My dad was the one that was just like, no, she needs to be around people who are her age. She needs to be able to understand how to turn it on and turn it off, if you will. She's very smart. She's very intelligent, but she needs to understand how to make friends and be around people who are her age, because that is going to be the group that she's going to grow up with, right? That's going to be the group that she's going to be a part of. And she needs to figure out how to adapt now that this is where we're going to be. We're not moving anywhere. So she needs to learn how to adapt. And that's exactly what happened.
So what I'm getting from what you're telling me, Vinaya, is that your mom had to balance what she thought was a better education going to Catholic school with your sanity, basically, right? Of having
Yes.
to deal with the prejudice and the way that folks treated both you and your sister. So she took the
Yes.
risk, right, of putting you back into public school, not knowing that they would recognize your talent and would create special programs for you. And then your dad, credits to him, saying that I want Vinaya to be well rounded. I don't necessarily want her, we called it to be skipped, moved ahead
Mm-hmm.
before her time. So they were really into understanding you and trying to do the best thing for you to put you on a track to be successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's when I look at parents, regardless of what the household looks like, I think that in most cases, parents do their, like yourself, right? And others, you guys do what you think is best. And my
Mm-hmm.
parents were doing
Yeah.
what they thought was best. And so I appreciated that. I appreciated, one, my mom, recognizing that the situation we were in was not sustainable. You
Yeah.
can't have your kids getting kicked out of school for fighting right, wrong, or indifferent. You can't have that happen. And you also can't have your children growing up education wise where they're not being pushed. They're not, being asked to go above and beyond. But you also can't have them in a situation where they are unable to adapt to society. And so they did a really great job of trying to balance out the want with the need and the need with the want. And I have no qualms in it. Back then I didn't understand it, but now at an older age, I get it. I don't have any kids of my own yet,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's something that when I look back at it, I appreciate it, right? Regardless if you were brought up in a private school system, public school system, I think the environment that you're in and your parents, or whoever is the guardian that's trying their best to raise you, is just doing their best to try to do what they know to do with what they know, and the skill sets that they have at that period of time. And so definitely what you said is absolutely correct.
Now, what I also noticed in our conversation we had before, so not only did you have your parents who were steering you in the right direction, typically there's someone in the school who recognizes your talent and does things to promote that talent. And it sounded like you had someone in your school who did that, a Mrs. Jones. Can you tell me about her?
Yes, yeah. So it's interesting. I think that we all have that one teacher. I know me and you were chatting, and you had that one teacher,
Yeah.
right? There's always that one teacher that you remember that, right, wrong, or indifferent, push come to shove, was never going to make you feel any less than who you were, and always was going to put you or set you up mentally to think that you can go out there and achieve more. And Mrs.
Right.
Jones did that for me. I remember sitting in her class. I was new. We had just been brought into the situation from, being in a private school environment. You're now going from being the minority to being a part of the majority. And so it was different, right? It was different because I was always into sports. They call young girls who are into sports tomboys. I didn't like to wear dresses to school. I didn't like to do any of that. I liked to wear a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, or
Mm-hmm.
t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers, or a basketball jersey. That's what I like to wear. And so I always naturally gravitated towards playing with the guys, regardless if it was, during recess playing kickball with the guys, or playing tag football with the guys, or playing basketball with the guys in gym. And so she never, made me feel like I was less of a little girl because I wanted to do that. When it came down to education, she always saw and recognized that, I'm finishing a test a lot faster than most, or I'm picking up on certain things a lot faster than most. And so I remember her reaching out to my parents and wanting to set up a parent teacher conference. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, I'm in trouble. I've done something. I don't talk in class. I might joke a little bit, but I don't think I'm the class clown. And I remember telling that to my mom in particular because, you back in those days, my parents believed in disciplining you. And, I'll kind of leave it at that. And
Most parents
so,
did back then.
exactly,
How they
right.
call somebody. Yeah, you call somebody on you.
So I was shaking in my boots, John. I was like, oh man, this is about to get bad. But the reality is that she wanted to talk to them about the situation education wise. She felt as though I was reading on a fourth grade level, and not like a newly inducted fourth grader, like someone who was 6 months or halfway into the school year fourth grader. She felt
Right.
like math and science, I was way ahead of my time. History was always, that thing that, I'll do it because I got to do it. And writing was something that I really enjoyed as well. And so she wanted to work with my parents in regards to not skipping me, right? Not having me test out to go ahead, but wanted to let them know that she was going to be giving me more homework, wanted to let them know that she was going to be giving me more responsibility in class, wanting to put me in a situation where I wasn't going to be bored, because that's what she was sensing. And so what she was sensing wasn't a kid who was struggling to fit in. She was sensing a kid who was struggling with trying to adapt with her peers, but also not wanting to dumb down herself, I guess,
Yeah.
education wise, to her peers. So I would sit in the back of the class. If I knew the answer, I would sometimes raise my hand or sometimes not. I would wait for everyone to leave and then turn my work in. So that way, I didn't come across as a know-it-all or
Right.
etc. And so she sensed these things. And so I'm fortunate for Mrs. Jones, because she helped me at that period of time, not knowing, put myself in a situation where if you have the right teacher, especially being an African American, I think that I give so much respect and applause to our teachers. Now, I think that they're doing the most that they can with the little bit of resources that they have. The school that I went to was in a white community, Newport News. There's a community, a housing development that's there that everyone knows about. It's called Kiln Creek. Kiln Creek is a multi duplex type of housing community. It has its own, couple of gas stations. It has its own elementary school, Kiln Creek Elementary. It has apartment complexes, duplexes, multifamily homes. It has mansions. It has a golf course. It
So
has
it's
all
pretty
these different
mixed. So
things.
your school was pretty integrated?
It was pretty integrated.
Okay.
And so that was different.
Yeah.
That was different. When you leave Kiln Creek and you get on the bus, you're not going to the houses that are around the corner from the school, right? You're going to Turnberry, which is where we used to live. And Turnberry, I think that while it was a mixed housing community, that outside looking in, it wasn't exactly, the greatest looking place. But for me at that period of time, I had a little small backyard in a townhouse community. My dad got me a basketball hoop that I could shoot with. And so it felt like normal, John. It felt
Yeah.
normal. I would come
Yeah.
home, I would do all the schoolwork that Mrs. Jones had for me, and I would go over it with my parents, and then I would go outside in the backyard, right? And that's what I did. And so I always give a shout out in regards to Mrs. Jones, because right, wrong, or indifferent, she didn't know how much she was going to play a pivotal role in my life, but she did.
Yeah, it's always important to have someone who recognizes your talent, encourages that talent, has high expectations. I always tell the story of Malcolm Gladwell talked about Brown versus education, where
Mm,
they integrated the students, but he said the big thing they missed was integrating the teachers.
mm-hmm,
Just like your experience where you went to an all-white Catholic school, you didn't necessarily have although they gave you the academics, they didn't give you the support or
mm-hmm,
encouragement or expectations. They didn't
mm-hmm,
have your back, basically, right?
mm-hmm.
And so by going to this public middle school, you found someone who I call it, that's your angel of middle school, right?
Mm, that's very true.
So based on our conversations, you took academics seriously. You graduated what top two?
I did. So when I was in middle school, where my middle school was, it was the halfway point, and it was a halfway point in regards to downtown Newport News and uptown Newport News. There weren't a lot of middle schools in Newport News at that period of time. There was roughly about 5 or 6 that everyone went to, and it was all based off of where you were zoned at. And so for me, because of where we lived, I went to the school that was the halfway point. But also, if you lived in downtown Newport News, Hines Middle School was the halfway point for you as well. And so I went to Hines Middle School for sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And I remember in eighth grade, you have like this graduation ceremony, and we're sitting in the audience, and it's the one time I wore a dress to school, so I'm already sitting there uncomfortable and a bit
Uh,
aggravated. But it was a culminating experience, because of the fact that I felt like I had a great, academic career in middle school. I felt like I did a lot. I won science fairs. I went to the regional and state science fair. I played AAU basketball, and was really starting to expand myself within the Newport News, Hampton 757 environment from playing sports. I was well engulfed and ingrained within the community from a church perspective. And so I
mhm.
really felt like it was a turning point, I would say, where I am being brought up in this environment, but I am not a product of my environment. I am
Right.
showing you that you can be something different and you can go above and beyond. Now, when I'm around my group of friends now, most of them are from downtown Newport News. Go figure. I
Hmm.
was from uptown Newport News, and so they always would say, you had this and you had that growing up. And it's crazy, because when we talk about experiences growing up, they always say to me, I didn't know. I didn't know this was going on. I didn't know that was going on. It's crazy that we always, judge a book by a cover, in particular within the Black community, because of how it looks on the outside. And I think that my parents did a really great job of making sure that on the outside looking in, we looked like we were brought up a certain way, raised a certain way, carried ourselves a certain way. And so when I go to this award ceremony in particular, my mom and dad are there. My sister was pulled out of high school to come to this event, and it was called the President's Award. Go figure. And
Yeah.
it's the top award given out to the top student in eighth grade. And so I'm sitting there, John. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I know I did great, but I did good. I didn't think I did great, but
Hmm.
I knew I
Hmm.
did good. I knew that I don't need an award to tell me that I did XYZ, right? Outside looking in, that was the exterior that I had. Inside looking out, John, I won that award, man. They're sitting there
Of
talking
course.
about, the prestige that comes with this, and the branding that comes with this, and all the accolades, etc. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, man, that would be awesome, right? For you to show up amongst your peers as being that one. And so they're starting it off, and it was the principal at the period of time who was giving the award out, and she was talking about, this year's award is different because what was interesting about this award is that this award is going out to two people. So there's two people who are tied as
Oh,
number
wow.
one. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Whoever that is, those two people, that's awesome.
They're going to be
um,
happy.
they're going to be happy, right? These two people, we had to go all the way back to elementary school, and we had to look at their grades, and we pulled
Wow.
reports of them and being in elementary school. And from the time that you would say like second, third grade, all the way up to eighth grade, both of these young, individuals, both these students only had one B. And so I'm thinking to myself, one B, and your entire time from third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, that's about 5, 6 years that we talking about where you only had one B and you
Yeah.
had all A's, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I don't know if that's me because I think I might have gotten, a couple of B's along the way, right?
Hmm.
They're talking about, both of these students are very active in their community. And I'm thinking to
Hmm.
myself, well, I'm very active in my community, right? Both these students find time to be active in playing sports. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm active in playing sports, right? Both these students are people who their peers look up to, are people who have led different initiatives within the school environment, etc. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, eh, I did, a couple of things in the school
Right.
system, but I don't think I did that much. So immediately in my head, John, I'm thinking, it is what it is. I won a couple of science fairs. I've done this, that, and the third. I'm ready to go to high school. Like let's keep it moving. Give
Yeah.
me give me my eighth grade diploma, and let's call it a day. So they say this year's president award goes to such and such and Vinaya Springer. And I'm like, what? Like, yeah, I gotta say that again.
Right.
And so, such and such, and Vinaya, please come to the front and accept your award. And literally, everyone's standing up around me, and it's crazy because the young lady that won in conjunction with me, she was a really good friend of mine at that period of time, and so we were sitting next to each other, not even knowing that we had very similar backgrounds and
Yeah.
experiences. And she was white,
Yeah.
and she never looked at me differently. She never thought of me differently. She always invited me to her house to play. She was into different things, like I was into different things, and so it was awesome. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
I always say you are who you hang out with, right? That rubs off on each
You
other.
you you're
Right.
absolutely correct, man. So we both grabbed each other's hands, and we're walking up, and our parents, we're turning around to our parents, and our parents are cheering us on, not knowing that we're really close friends and all these different things. So it was awesome, man. It was really awesome. I had a bunch of people come up to me, and they were just saying that, like, this is so great, this is so awesome, to have to for you to be black, and for you to get this, like, this is awesome. And again, things at that period of time not really registering with me because this was just something that I thought you should do. I thought that you should go in there and give 110%. I thought that you should go in there and shine. I thought you should go in there and make good grades. Good grades get you into college. Good grades get you into a good job. Doing well in school, again, being a part of a black family, are what you have to do in order to survive. And so I didn't look at anything that anyone said to me, John, besides this is just another stepping stone to me getting to where I want to be, long term in life.
Yep. So we're about an hour in,
Yep.
right? And we're at the end of middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm to summarize, you moved around as an army brat. You had some racial discrimination. Let's just call it what it is at
Mm-hmm.
Catholic school. But yeah, adversity is moderate, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
up until this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to get into the second phase, which is high school and then college, where I
Yep.
think things right now your track is pretty darn good. If I were to predict where things are going to go,
Yep.
so let's talk about high school a little bit.
Yeah. So I think high school for me, can be summarized in a way of a continuation of college. I mean, a continuation of middle school.
Yep.
I played varsity basketball from ninth to 12th grade. I maintained, my grades and my GPA. I was actively engaged and involved in sports, actively engaged and involved in community and church. I had situations growing up, unfortunately, like many that are a part of the Black community, where my parents were having difficulties in regards to their marriage, and so that did play a part as I started getting older, because now, you're witnessing things that you don't want others to know is transpiring outside your household, right? So I would go to school, I would go to practice, I would come home. You walk into your parents arguing and fussing and fighting. You go into your room, you close the door, you turn the TV on, you knock out your homework, you get on AOL Messenger at that period of time.
Yeah.
You're playing video games, you're doing everything to block out, what's happening outside your door. And John, it was a rinse and repeat. It was a rinse and repeat for 4 years straight. Mentally, it did take a toll.
Yeah.
Mentally, it was a situation that I think I was embarrassed by. And so I didn't really talk to a lot of people about it. There was a situation that transpired playing basketball where it did eventually come out, what was happening in the household. I was on the court and I was setting a pick, but I didn't just set a pick. Like, I put my elbows out. Like,
Hmm.
in my head, I wanted to injure this person because I had so much anger built up. I had so much, confusion built up. I had all this animosity and tension built up. I got my first technical foul. And I remember afterwards, I was sitting there crying. And my coach came and tried to talk to me. I was like, "Leave me alone." I was just very standoffish. It just wasn't like me. It just was not like me. My teammates knew, it wasn't like me. And so, interesting enough, there was a conversation with my parents and my coach. My coach comes up to me, a couple of days later, and he says, "Hey, look, I didn't know what was going on in the household. You
Right.
could have came and talked to me." And I said to him, when you are in a Black household, talking to someone about your feelings and emotions is not something that you are encouraged to do. You keep your business at
Yeah.
home,
Doesn't come
and
natural.
it does not come natural. And so it was interesting, though that happened in 10th grade. So 11th and 12th grade was really more about me just trying to find my way out of that situation, out of Newport News, out of this environment that I felt was engulfing me in ways that, in one way, it was enriching me to go out there and just overcome, but in other ways it was kind of pulling me into, being a product of my environment. When your household is the reality of many households in the 757, there's that aspect. Because you grew up in a church, hanging out, with people doing certain things was something that never happened, right? So I never went to parties.
Yeah.
The first and only party I went to in high school outside of junior prom was prom, senior prom. So I socially awkward hanging out with friends that didn't play basketball. It was kind of like a no-no. You
Yeah.
don't hang out with that crowd. You don't do this. You don't do that. That's kind of what was instilled in me, to be completely honest with you. It was just basketball, church, and school for 4 years straight. That's just the mentality that it was. You don't hang out with these people. You don't do this. You don't do that. Very strict, and so therefore, if I wasn't hanging out with people I played basketball with, or people that I went to church with, that was it. I was in the house, and it was just that's the best way to kind of summarize it. Summarize those 4 years is that it was a situation where I wanted to get out, man.
Yep. So rocky with your family home. Good thing you had basketball and church to and school as sort of a good distraction, right?
Yeah,
And you went to Woodside High School, and you had mentioned like there were fights when you went
there
to games,
was.
people got shot. So it could have gone very much left for
It
you
it,
if you
it
didn't have that
definitely could
focus.
have, man. It definitely could have, and that's why I said that. I get where my parents were coming from in regards to wanting to put that strictness there and put that surrounding around you. But just because there's that protection, if you will, that's there, it doesn't mean that you are not going to be a witness to certain things. It doesn't mean that those certain things are not going to transpire around you. I never knew what a melee was until I was in school, and every single day there was a fight. You had situations where, now let me take a step back. Just because I went to a school that was called a magnet school, and it was a new school, they pumped a lot of money into this school. They pumped a lot of money into another school called Heritage High School in downtown Newport News. Doesn't erase the fact that it was Newport News, Virginia. And
They call it
so
a magnet school because that's what they had in the metal detectors were magnets.
I mean, man, thinking about it, yeah, but no. The magnet school system, me and you are chatting about this. It's a system, a school that's focusing on a specific trade, or
Yeah.
a specific type of education route. Mine's was mass communication. Interesting enough, that's not the school I really wanted to go to. I wanted to go to the school that was in downtown Newport News because it was a magnet school for math and science. That is what I was drawn to. That's what I really wanted to build more of a specialty, if you will, around. But because I wasn't zoned for, downtown, nor did my parents want me going to downtown Newport News, that school did not happen. However, the same things that happened at that school were the same things that happened at my school. We had metal detectors when you come in and when you leave out. You had people who were fighting. You had people who, brought guns to school. Being around, young girls who are pregnant at the age of 13 and 14 was something that was normal. I had friends that were unfortunately involved in different situations where they were shot. I had a really good friend of mine growing up who was killed at the age of 13, unknowns to me that he was a part of a gang. And
Wow.
so these are the things that, again, going back to where I said outside looking in, my friends growing up always thought that we were the Cosbys, we were the Huxtables, right? And the reality is that there's things that I made them privy to that made them realize we're from the 7-5, right? Regardless of where you were raised and how you were raised, you were Black, and because of such, you were going to be experiencing some of the same things that every, Black family
Yeah.
experiences growing up in a 757. So yeah, man, I had to look up the word melee because I definitely
Yeah.
didn't know what the hell that meant. But we had that. You would play, rival schools for basketball, which we did, and the cops were outside. I remember us going to Heritage, and we had police escorts there. You get in, you play, you get out, you get on the bus, you leave. I remember when certain schools would come to play at our school, Hampton High School in particular. It was always, that was our rival, so there was always cops that were there because depending on who lost and who won, things could get a bit rowdy afterwards. And so, but again, you don't know any different. It's a part of your environment, so you're just used to it. You knew that this was going to go down when you made it to, especially sports wise, if you made it to regionals or if you made it to state, depending on where you went, you always had people looking at you because most of the girls on my team were Black. And so we knew what we were getting into when we would go to certain predominantly white environments or certain predominantly white schools and play there.
Yeah.
You heard the little racial slurs. Oh,
Hmm.
they're from Newport News. About bad news, but it was in a way where they were being discriminated versus being, encouraging, supporting, etc. So that was high school, man. It was a situation where it put some, I don't want to say hair on my back, but it made me grow up a lot quicker than what most probably did from the time that they were 14 to 18, just because of certain things that transpired both with inside my house and outside of such.
So I almost picture you're like on a ship, right? And your grade school years, you're on a calm river, relatively calm. High school is a lot of waves thrashing around, the boat's kind of, listing and you're feeling those waves. Now we're going to get to college, and I think, there might be a storm or brew.
Yeah, both
So,
literally and figuratively, man.
oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. My goodness. I didn't mean to go that route, but you're right. So let's talk about college. A little bit about your experience of choosing the college and that decision points, and then let's get into it. Let's get into some of the challenges that you had
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So college for me, like I said, I think, elementary, middle, now high school, because I put so much focus on grades and put so much focus on being one step ahead and being and putting myself in the best position because I knew I was going to college. You had two options growing up in my household, college or military, and I chose option A. So I wanted to put myself in the best predicament. My mother went to Xavier, which is an HBCU in New Orleans.
Hmm.
My aunt went to Southern HBCU in New Orleans. My father went straight into the military after he graduated from high school. And so you would naturally think that I gravitated towards HBCUs, but I did not. I didn't know anything about HBCUs until I actually ended up being at one. But the way that I got to going to an HBCU, let me take a step back. Hampton University, right down the street from me. I didn't even really know about what Hampton University and being a historically black college and university meant. I just thought it was a school that most people from, the 757 went to
Yeah.
because it was mostly black people, right? Didn't know anything about, XYZ. So, yeah, man, one summer in high school, I ended up going to Texas. I was going to Texas because I got invited to this science and math camp that they had out there for a week. My dad went with me. So while I was at camp, my dad was going back to, Austin and doing things there. And then he would come pick me up at the end. That Monday through Friday, man, it was just love. It was being a part and around people who thought like me, people who had aspirations of maybe, majoring in engineering or computer science or whatever the case is from a math and science perspective. At the end of it, you make it through the camp. They offer you a scholarship to University of Texas at Austin. And so
Hmm.
for me, my first option of going to college was University of Texas at Austin. I could have been a Longhorn if you want to believe that or not. But walking around the campus, John, with my dad, I don't know. It was a situation where that was the first reality, I think, for me, or eye-opening experience for me of the concept of being a majority and being a minority and being treated as such. Me and you were talking about a game that you played where it was ding ding, or and
Yeah.
when you see, someone else who is a person of color.
Right.
And me and my dad, we walked around and I would just look at him and he would look at me and I said to him, I don't know, I don't know about this. And he was like, what do you mean? You're used to this, you're accustomed to this, etc. And I was like, but I don't know. I think that this is too far outside the bounds of what I want. This is way away from home, right? Yes, New Orleans is what, 4 or 5, 6 hours away, but this is unfamiliar territory and this is too far away from home. So I actually declined the scholarship. I declined the offer, and by doing that, it put me in a situation where I absolutely had no college admissions or acceptances to anywhere. This happened about 4 or 5 months before graduating from high school. And so I was underneath the gun
Yeah, that
because,
was a risky
again,
move. Yeah.
it was a risky move. You have 5 months to figure out where you're going to go or you're going to military. That literally was what it was. And so I'm starting to go heavy on applying to different colleges, etc. I had applied to ODU, got in right away. I had applied to VCU, got in right away. I had applied to Hampton, got in right away,
Yeah.
right? But I think that it was the getting in right away that was the signal that this isn't something I want to do because this means that this isn't competitive, right? I
Yeah.
want to go through a process.
You want to stretch.
I want to stretch. So I actually applied to Duke University. Being a basketball fan, being a Michael
Yeah.
Jordan fan, it felt like I was going against, and being a traitor, but Duke had and still has to this day a really great engineering program. And so I said, you know what, let me try to get in here on the minority scholarship. The thing about Duke is that in order to be qualified for a minority scholarship, you had to have a 1200 on your SATs. John, I had 1100. So I
Yep.
said, let me try to write a college, essay or whatever, see if they get me in. Didn't happen. So, I fast forward, started looking at the schools that I didn't really want to go to, but, I was considering them. A friend of the family actually recommended, looking at North Carolina A&T. And, they said that if she really wants to do, math and science, if she really wants to do engineering, they have a spectacular engineering program and she should really check it out. At first, I was very hesitant, John. I'm not even going to lie to you. It was something that I said, I don't want to do, at HBCU. I want to go to a school that I feel like is going to challenge me. Little did I know that A&T was going to challenge me,
Yeah.
but I applied. I got in. I got accepted. I got a scholarship to the engineering program. I got a full ride, for room and board, and so that's actually where I ended up
It's
going,
great.
as you
Yeah.
mentioned in my intro, and have no qualms or regrets in that. That was the best decision that I made unknowingly for myself at that period of time. Fast forward, we're at A&T. A&T being in Greensboro, North Carolina, it was different because I had never been to North Carolina at all outside of going to a basketball camp, the Chapel Hill area.
Mhm.
So I never really knew anything about A&T. It was just I need to make a decision. I never knew anything about Greensboro, never visited Greensboro. And so it was definitely different. I will say that, Newport News is not country. It's I would
More
say if you
suburbia,
had
right?
to, yes, yes. And so Greensboro, North Carolina, it was a big country. And so
Yeah.
for
I've been there. No.
so we get there and I remember my parents were just like, oh, this is gonna be different, but this is what you want. So, this is what's gonna transpire. I was in school, everything was going well for the first half of my freshman year. I get a text message from my mom who is just like, hey, when you get dropped off at this address. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's going on? What does getting dropped off at this address mean? I remember talking with my friend at that period of time who was driving me home and telling him, and he said, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know, man. I have no idea. I remember going to his mom and dad's house before he dropped me off just to say hello to them. His mom had asked me, so you're going to go see your parents now? I was like, well, my mom told me I need to go to this address. His mom was just like, well, do you know why? And I was like, no. And she was, just kind of asking me, kind of, trying to understand what was going on.
Right.
I'm thankful for him because he kind of, told her to back off. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't know anything. And come to find out, it was me going to a different household because my parents, who were already legally separated and I didn't know, my mom had filed for divorce. And so
Wow.
my parents were now living in separate households. And so my Thanksgiving freshman year was spent trying to just understand what the hell had happened, right? It trying to understand what is this living in different households, trying to understand what I seen everyone else go through that was a part of a single parent household now become my household, right, at the age of 18. And so that was different, man. That was different. I think going back to the whole idea of not expressing and communicating and all the above played a part again in my life because I went back to school and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't talk to anybody about outside of him, my really good friend that period of time, who's like a brother to me still to this day. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I tried to shelter that aspect away because, again, I felt like as I was being brought up and raised that you don't share your business with people outside of the family. And as a result of not sharing, as a result of not being open, as a result of of not, just talking about what I was mentally and emotionally going through. It showed out in different ways. I showed up to class day one with a 3.75. I ended that semester with a 1.8.
Wow.
I finished freshman year with a 2.5, 2.6, maybe. I literally went to class for 1 week. And then after that, didn't show up. I showed up maybe once or twice a week just to show them that I'm alive. But Wednesday through Sunday, I was partying. I
So that
was
hit
with
so that hit you hard then.
It did. It did. It did. I felt like everything I knew to be normal just kind of went out the door. I
Yeah.
felt like this is reality, and reality, I don't know how to really deal with this. And so literally you would think that the child who had, damn near perfect attendance, the child who only had one B all the way to eighth grade, the child who, excelled exceptionally well, was ranked top 10, graduating out of high school with a class of 500 plus, people who were going to Rice, Carnegie Mellon, all these different places, ends up being this 18, now 19-year-old who essentially is about to flunk out of college in less than 6 months. Like literally, that's how quickly life took a change. I remember going to my exams, looking at the exam. It all looked like a foreign language to me. I signed my name on a dotted line, John, just to get the 5 points, and then left.
Wow.
And so that's how quickly life changed for me. That summer, I got into some situations where I got a reckless driving ticket. I was, trying to adhere to the strict environment of such, and just instead of communicating, again, underlying factor, instead of communicating, I tried to rush home, be home by a certain curfew, missed the curfew because I got pulled over. I was doing a buck 5, buck 6, and a
Hmm.
65. Fortunately, the cop docked me at like 95. I had to
Yeah.
go to court. I got a restricted license. I could only drive between the hours of 8 to 5. I had to have an escort drive me around after 5 o'clock. I got kicked out of my mom's house because I lied about my grades, and I had to go live with my father. That summer I had to work 2 jobs just to try to keep, the lights on for whatever I knew the lights to be for 19, because
Hmm.
now you have a father who's trying to deal with, being recently divorced. And so it was a lot that I had to figure out in a matter of a year. And it was a lot of growing up that I had to do. I'm thankful, for someone like my grandmother who, going back to New Orleans, again, and that being home, regardless of whatever I had going on, John, she always was there. She always was a phone call away. Whatever you need, she had me. And so I quickly became familiar with Sally Mae. Me and
Yep.
Sally became really great
Good
friends. We
friends.
became besties. And
Hmm.
Sally Mae did not happen, or would not have happened, if it wasn't for my grandmother, because unfortunately my parents were unable for different reasons to co-sign on my loans.
Yeah, and you had lost your
Um,
scholarship, right?
I
Because
had
your
lost my
grades had.
scholarship. I had lost all financial backing for school, and I was put into a situation again. You either figure it out or you go to military. That's kind of what came out of the situation for my parents. And so my grandmother was like, "Hey, look, you finished college. You promised me that you finished college, and I will sign off on your loans." And so she did, not knowing what was going to happen, the following year, aka Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
Hurricane Katrina resulted in me losing half my family to that storm, to that hurricane. And so I
Wow.
lost aunts, I lost, cousins in the matter of like a day or two. And so freshman year, I'm still trying to decompress from, right? And what happened freshman year, I'm still trying to decompress from what happened with Thanksgiving, and finding out that my parents not only were legally separated for a long time, but now they're actually divorced. I'm also grappling with, things from a personal perspective, and, my own sexual identity. So I identify as being gay. I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus family.
Yeah.
But at that period of time, being 18, 19 years old, and being a part of the Black community, it was such a taboo thing.
Yeah.
And I knew I was gay. I had a girlfriend, at that period of time. And so I was grappling with that, grappling with life, grappling with Hurricane Katrina, and all these different things. A year later, my grandmother passes. And so I just never caught a break. I never caught a break
Yeah,
in
yeah,
regards to dealing with things. It always felt like a lot of things were happening all at once. And then, oh, yeah, you're still trying to figure out how the hell you're going to get through college, because I did decide to stick with engineering school. I decided to figure it out. I felt like growing up in Newport News, we don't quit. We don't, the one thing that we don't do is we don't quit. We're going to figure it out. Even if it takes a longer period of time, that underdog mentality, it kicked in. And, that's the thing I always make sure I include in my story. That's the reason why I always make sure I give a shout out to 757. And I say I'm a product of my environment, but I'm a product as a result of my environment, but I'm not a product of my environment, meaning that I didn't allow my environment to steer me off of my goals and what I wanted to achieve. I allowed my environment to motivate me, inspire me to go out there and achieve more and to overcome and be that underdog. And so that's exactly what happened. People like to brag about 4 years of college. I was on that 5-year plan. I
yeah,
just I just thank the Lord for just making it through. But losing my grandmother was hard. It was hard because she was the one that I think my grandmother knew I was gay. I'll be completely honest with you. I think she knew, and she just wanted me to say something to her. I think my parents knew, to be completely honest with you, but it was just a situation where if I was going to talk to someone, it would have been her about
right.
it, when I think about it, but it is what it is. And so I never came out to my parents when I was, young. I didn't come out to my parents until recently when I was 35. I'm 37 now. And
Wow.
so, yes, so it was a situation that, because of how we were brought up, because of
Yeah,
how we were raised, being in a black community, it's man and wife, it's husband and wife, it's the Bible, it's these types of different things. And so that was tough to deal with. Grandmother dying, losing half your family, parents divorced, you losing all your money financially supportive in regards to getting through college. Now you've lost not only your financial backing and your scholarships, but now you're on academic probation because of what you did or did not do your freshman year. And so I was just thankful to get through, man. I had 2 jobs. I was fortunate enough to get an internship with a company called Union Pacific out in Omaha, Nebraska, where I was then thrown from being a part of a predominantly black environment to being now in a predominantly white environment again. So having to learn how to code switch, which is something that me and you chatted about,
yep.
also now became a part of my repertoire and my background and my
Mhm.
experience. All these things that started to factor in are the things that help get me through college. Right, wrong, or indifferent, like it, love it, or hate it. Those are the things that help get me through. Things that a lot of people did not know were transpiring. And so I'll summarize college with what happened getting into Cisco.
Yeah, I mean,
So
this is what the point I
yeah.
really want to get to here. I think is a very interesting part of your story. So, as we see, college, there were, to say, challenges, right? And multi-dimensional challenges in your life that could have put you on a trajectory that wouldn't have been very favorable. But what
Yeah.
happened with your application to Cisco, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. So let's go through it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. So I never shied away from a challenge. I never shied away from saying I can get it done. I remember telling my parents when I went off to school that, me going to A&T and me going to North Carolina and me going, to somewhere outside and going out there on my own is because I needed to find myself. That's what I wanted to do. Me going or trying to attempt to go into corporate America was me saying, hey, will corporate America accept the person that has been found?
Yeah.
Right? Will corporate America accept this person who has had all these experiences, all these challenges? Will they accept this person who, on the outside looking in, looks like they have it all together, but on the inside looking out, does not? Right? Will they accept someone who is not the stereotypical cookie cutter looking person? I just had starter locks, so I had short hair. I did not know exactly the walk, and the talk, but I knew that if I got a chance, they were not going to regret it. And so I chatted about my internship at Union Pacific and just the cultural environment. But interesting enough, I also was working on Cisco like things in that environment. And so that's what I was putting on my applications. That's what I was putting on my resumes. And that's what stuck out. When I applied for Cisco in the CSAT program, it was recommended to me by someone who had recently just gone through it, who also went to A&T, who I was a really good friend with. And I'm thankful that they kept pushing me. I'm thankful that they kept nudging me because honestly, I didn't think I was capable. I didn't think I was worthy, and I didn't think I deserved it. I knew I deserved to be in corporate America, but I didn't think I deserved to be within the top 10% that got accepted into a program like such. So me applying to the CSAT program was fully on a whim. I did not have the grade requirement, which was a 2.8. I had a 2.75. But I had all the extracurricular activities, as I mentioned, because I had to figure out a way to balance it out. No one tells you that, when you cough up a semester in college, it takes a year and some change
Hard
to
to
actually recover
recover.
from such,
Yeah.
right? So I didn't know all these different things. I was just literally trying to figure out how to survive in this world on my own, right? Because I didn't want to bother my parents with this. I felt like I owed it to myself as well as owing it to them that, what, I'm not a mess up, right? I'm
Hmm.
not, a person who is someone that can't go out there and overcome, right? I'm trying not to cuss, but I'm trying not to be that. I didn't want to be known as that person who effed up, right?
Yeah.
That's not the person I wanted to be known as. And so I applied for a CSAT program. I remember having the first initial conversation, and of course, they automatically, honed in on my GPA, John. And I said to them that, if I get the chance to get into the actual official interview process, I have no problem in sharing my story. The CSAT process, the first round and the second round are just very informal/formal types of questions and interviews. If you had to sell me a pen, how would you sell me a
Yeah.
pen? They ask you about certain things from a technical perspective that, I was able to answer. And so I'm thinking to myself, hell yeah, I can get through the first and second round. I can get this job. Again, going back to my middle school and high school mentality, where I knew if you put me in an environment and it's competitive, I was going to overcome. So we're in Raleigh. They put us in a hotel, they give us mileage. And I'm like, wow, this is great. A company that's paying for me to stay in a hotel and all these different things. But man, you're sitting here with people who, again, graduated from Duke, Carnegie Mellon, Rice, UC Berkeley,
Right. How do you compete?
etc. How do you compete with these types of people? And fortunately for me, how I competed was just my instincts. I competed based off of my ability just to talk to people. And I competed with my ability unknowingly to me, which is now my superpower that I recognize now, with just being authentic, being transparent, and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so you get into the final round. The final round consisted of whiteboarding. It consisted of role play and consisted of just straightforward, a panel type of interview. And my panel interview was different because, again, they wanted to know why they should accept me when I had a 2.7. And I said to them, man, if you really want to hear the story, I'll tell you the story. And then I stopped John and I said to them, you know what, let me take a step back. Have you, seen the movie 21? And there were a couple of head nods, but it wasn't head nods enough for me to feel like they had seen the movie. So I said, let me tell you a quick little synopsis of what the movie was about. 21's about a young man who's in college. He's gone to attending a very prestigious school that has a great robotics, great engineering, math, and science graduate program. And he's thinking of different ways to be able to pay for this program. His grades clearly qualified for him. He was at the top of the class. He was engaged and involved in all these different extracurricular activities, including being a part of this robotics competition with one of his best friends. However, as soon as his classes were over at school, he rides his bike. He doesn't even have any other transportation but his bike around the town, and he's going to work. At work, he's trying to add up, his paychecks, and he's recognizing he does not have the amount of money, even close to the amount of money saved up, nor is he going to make enough money between now and the end of the school year to even be able to pay if he does get into the program. He's researching different things. He comes to find out that they do give away a scholarship to the top candidate accepted into the program. He felt great. If I can prove to them that this is something that they should look at me for, and I can come across very compelling to them and et cetera, and then my grades match it, my extracurricular activities that match it, I should be a shoo-in. The reality is that the financial aspect and everything else that goes into that was really weighing on him. And so he was just trying to figure out different ways to do different things. Unbeknownst to him, one of the clubs that he was a part of, a math club, by day, if you will, reality was a counting cards club. It was a club, it was a group of people that on the weekends flew to Vegas and they gambled via counting cards. So if you're going to play blackjack, for example, which i.e. references the movie 21, they were counting the cards and they all would sit at this table, 4 or 5 people deep at this table, giving each other different signals as to when to go high, when to go low, when to cash out, etc. And so for me, John, I'm not a gambler. I play blackjack from time to time.
Yep.
There's just no way that I would have been able to fathom how to do that. But they were making bank. They were making so much money every single weekend. They would split it up amongst themselves. He would take his portion, go back to school, put his winnings inside his ceiling in his dorm room, out of all places, and then continue Monday through Friday as if he was just a regular person. So he was literally living a double life, but no one really knew this outside of his club that he was a part of. Now, here's a twist in the story, John. The story also includes his professor. His professor of math and science also was the math club leader, if you will, aka the person that was the grown adult in the room that
Right.
knowingly did this with them, that knowingly took them to Vegas, paid for their transportation there. They clearly were able to pay for their transportation back once they started getting some winnings in. And he also had a gambling problem. He was in bad debt with some people in Vegas. And so his winnings he would take and put it towards paying down his debt. However, every time they went back to Vegas, he would then put in another bet. And so he's literally multiplying his winnings, but he's only paying a certain percentage down on his debt that he owes to some of the people there. So he's starting to get himself into some trouble. Again, unbeknownst to his group. So everyone has their little stories that are transpiring, but the main focus is on the main guy who doesn't come from a lot. His upbringing was more about just focusing, keeping your head down. Sounds very familiar. And putting your best foot forward. If you do that and you stay a model citizen, good things will come. Well, you fast forward in the story's getting towards the end. Things are starting to go left. His professor got into some really bad trouble in Vegas. And so as a result of such, he goes to each one of his students that are part of this club and says, "Hey guys, I'm in a pinch, I'm in a bind. Do you guys have anything you can add to the pot? Here's the number." And they're all like, I've spent my money on this, or I spent my money on that. His star pupil, who is the star character, was like, "Yeah, I mean, I have XYZ saved up, but you know what that is towards." Unfortunately, everyone knew where he hid his money, and his professor, while he was gone, came into his dorm room and took his money. He comes back after a long day, a long evening in work. He sees that the tile on the ceiling is gone. His money is gone. Now he's panicking because graduation is about to come up. He's about to go through the interview process, and he doesn't have the financial backing in place just in the event that he doesn't get the top candidate award. So at this period of time, he doesn't think it's worthwhile even going through the interview process because he doesn't feel like he's going to get number one. He also doesn't feel like he has the profile that they're looking for. This well put together man or young woman that comes from a prestigious family, right? And so he's really down. What he does do, however, is that he secretly plans a trip back to Vegas. And when he secretly plans a trip back to Vegas, not only with the group of people that he went with, minus the professor, but they quadruple their earnings, John. They go, they gamble, they count cards, they get out. With the winnings that they had, he made an arrangement with the guys that his professor was in some trouble with and pays off the debt. But in the process of paying off the debt, he also hires them in a way to say, hey, we need some protection. This guy is taking advantage of us. We're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. We don't know any better, et cetera. Playing that card of innocence and immaturity, but in the reality, just wanting all this to be done. So the guys agree. They take care of their professor. You don't hear about the professor, nor do you hear from the professor anymore. He comes back, he pays down some of his debt that he had from school. He gives some of his money away to his mom. And then he actually gives some of the money away to his best friend because during this period of time, he and his best friend had kind of fell out. So he's going through a lot, John, right? He's going through a lot. He's learning a lot. He's experiencing a lot. And he's 4 years that he's in school. I said to them, so where I go with this story now and how this translates back to me is going through the interview process. He had a choice. He had a choice of he could have told them the truth or he could have told them a lie. I said, let me push pause on the story and let me go talk about my story. So I was in college for 5 years. Of those 5 years, the first semester of my freshman year, I had a 3.75. I was on top of the world. I had a scholarship, full ride, everything was paid for. In a matter of a couple of weeks, things quickly changed. And I went back to school, didn't show up for any classes for all of 6 months. I showed up at the beginning and I showed up at the end. I signed my name on a dotted line to get 5 points on an exam, just so that way it didn't show up as a big fat zero, and walked away. I came back the following sophomore year, but I came back the following sophomore year with no money to my name. I had no scholarships. I was now an advocate of Sally Mae. Me
Yeah.
and Sally Mae were best friends. And someone asked me, well, why is that? I was like, oh, well, because of my GPA that the second semester freshman came out to being, I had a 1.8. And everyone was like, what? I was
Hmm.
like, yes, I had a 1.8, a 3.75 to 1.8. You can kind of do the law of averages of in the twos of how I ended up. I had some situations that also arise where I got kicked out of my mom's house. I had to go live with my dad. I had a reckless driving ticket. I had to work 2 jobs and I had to be home by 8 p.m. all at the age of 19. I had to call my grandmother and beg and plead for her to be able to sign my student loans as a co-signer because no one else in my family had the ability to be able to do so. For the last 4 years, I have worked a full-time job while also attending school and trying to get through by the grace of God with a decent GPA just to be able to sit here before you guys and be able to describe my story to you. I said, press play on the movie 21. He, during the interview process, was asked about overcoming. Tell me a story about overcoming. And in the heads and the interview panel are like, okay, oh, wow. And in that interview, during the last part of the interview, what comes from that is he stops and he says, so I hope you're entertained. I hope that I've dazzled you and wowed you enough to be able to be considered for not only this graduate program, but for the scholarship. He gets up, he walks away, and that's the end of it. And so, John, for me, I
Hmm.
paused my story. I said, that's pretty much the end of it. Here I am today. I hope I've entertained you enough. I got up and walked away. And John, when I tell you that was probably, if I think about the top 5 things in my life that have been risky, that probably is definitely in the top 5. But I felt as though my back was against the wall, right? I felt as though I was being kind of judged, if you will, because of my GPA. And, I think GPA is a whole different conversation,
Yeah, and at that
but
point, you had nothing to lose, right?
I had nothing to lose. I felt as though, look, if this is going to be, this is going to be for me. I've made it to this point with my GPA. So someone has to see something in me. But when I left out the room and I took a deep breath and exhaled, one of the ladies that was part of the interview panel came out And she said, Miss Springer, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, oh boy, I really done it now. And so she says, wow, just wow, like you left us all speechless. And I was like, well, I didn't really intend to leave you guys speechless, but if that's the outcome, that's great. And she said, I think you've changed the narrative a bit, right? And I don't think you really realize what you did. And I said, again, don't really know what that means. And she said, I'll put it to you this way. Your GPA does not qualify you to even be considered for this program. That interview does. And
Yeah.
so, regardless of whatever happens, please do not stop being your authentic self. Please do not stop storytelling, is actually what she said. And just kind of left it at that. So, what's crazy about this whole situation, John, is that they would have us lined up outside of a room, standing, just single filed in line. And people were passing out.
Mm.
People were so nervous. They had their, portfolios in their
Yeah.
hands and things like that.
A little
And
bit
me,
stressed out.
stressed, like stressed. And then there was me who literally just walked in with my resume, a couple of printed sheets of my resume, my notepad, and that was it. Walked out, I'm just smiling just because of the fact that I'm a big believer in the fact that when you show up, it's not you showing up, it's God showing up. And I felt like at that period of time, God was showing up through me.
Right.
And he took control. And that's why I felt, walking away, whatever it is, whatever it's gonna be, it's gonna be that. And so that's the interview process, man. That's how it went. I got in my car, I drove back to Greensboro because I was still working in Greensboro, trying to figure out, if I'm going back to Newport News, Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
am I going to accept a job with a contract engineering company that was based in Maryland, or was I going to go work for the federal government? Because those were literally the only two job offers I had when I graduated from college.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
That's a powerful story. So you told a story where it was art imitating life and life imitating art, where you interweaved it so that the end of that movie was in parallel with the end of your interview.
Exactly.
So I could
Exactly.
imagine that was very powerful to those
Exactly.
folks that you were sitting across from.
Yeah, no,
And
man, it definitely was. I think that, whenever I tell that story and look back at it, everyone's interpretation of it is always different. I think yours gave me a different perspective, right? I think that the parallels of telling a story and how that story, interlocks with yours, and how you can make it interlock with yours is definitely something that is different. Others, it was just like a story of triumph, right? It was a story of just being yourself. It was a story of being risky. It was a story of being the underdog. And so you definitely just added a new perspective to it, John. And I appreciate that.
just by telling that story showed that you were fearless and that bringing your authentic self, sometimes that word's a little bit overused, but we'll say it here because it's real. Bringing your authentic self, being yourself was your superpower. And
Yeah,
being able to tell that story differentiated you from all those, Duke graduates and others standing in the hallway who were passing out.
yes, no, you are absolutely correct. And that came to pass the last day, the day before I actually graduated. So the day before I graduated, it's interesting because that period of time my mother was getting her master's in divinity. So she had went back to school to get that. And so she got that at VCU. Sorry, not VCU, Virginia Union. And her graduation was the same day as my graduation. So my older sister went to that one, and my dad drove down to North Carolina to come see me. I remember them both, every single day. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What
Yeah.
are you going to do?
A little bit of pressure.
And, it was a little bit of pressure. It was a little bit of pressure. And I kept saying to myself, I'm not going back to Newport News. So you need to figure it out. But I was heading out of my apartment, heading to the final day of graduation, and I got a phone call, and it was a Raleigh area code, and so 919 popped up on my phone. And I had only had a couple of friends who had 919 numbers, and so I knew it was them. I knew it was Cisco calling, and I knew that regardless if the outcome was good or bad, I was going to answer the phone. I needed to know what this was going to be, not just for clearly my own sake of understanding what my next chapter in life was going to be, but was this something that was going to make me completely reconsider going into corporate America? And it was mentally for me, that's how I looked at it. I looked at it as saying, if I don't get accepted into this program, corporate America is not for me, because you can't say you want something different and then here's your opportunity to have that. So the lady calls, she says, "Is this Miss Springer?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And she says that, "This is such and such from Cisco. How are you doing today?" And I said, "It depends on how this conversation goes."
Exactly.
And she starts chuckling, and she was just like, "Well, hopefully I caught you at a good time because and then she took a pause, and she was just like, "I'm overjoyed and excited to tell you that, you've been accepted into the CSAT program." And I'm like, "Oh my God, like, yes, yes, yes."
Yeah.
And
Wow.
she says that, "I got to tell you, you really challenged them in regards to their thinking and their style and their approach as to the types of candidates they let in." And I said, I could tell. I said that I stood out amongst the people just in real life, in regards to being in the room with them. And she said, "What did you mean by that?" I said, "Well, there wasn't a lot of African American or Black people there. That's number one." I said, "Number two, the ones that were there, I could tell that they didn't go to an HBCU, right? I could tell that just from the style, the feel, the vibe, if you will. I'm just different. I felt like I don't fit into a specific set or a specific group. I don't look a certain way. I don't talk a certain way. I am okay with using slang. I am okay with using ebonics." I even said that to her. And she so let me take a step back, because the person who called me, I knew because she was there during the interview process, and she also was Black. So that
Okay.
was also interesting.
Hmm.
And she laughed and she said, I absolutely know what you're trying to say. I said, "Great." And she said, "But no, you coming in and just being willing to just be transparent, right? You coming in and being able to just be authentic.
Right.
Above all else, the type of job that you would be doing in the field requires you to be able to tell a story. It requires you to be able to understand a customer's business problems and then to be able to create a vision for them in regards to a Cisco solution to be able to match that problem."
Yep.
So you have the skill sets required to do that. But above all else, you unknowingly were telling us a story and doing it in a way that was just so compelling that we really deliberated on you. And I said, "Wow." She said, "No, we deliberated on you, which is why you're one of the last people that I am calling, because you are one of the last people, a part of the last couple of people that we're calling to let them know they got in." And I said, "You know what? That's fine." I said, "Look, at the end of the day, I don't care if I was the first call. I don't care if I was the last call. I got the call that I got in, and I told her that you guys are not going to regret it." So, she pretty much kind of fast forward with everything in regards to what's coming up next, et cetera, et cetera. And then she said, "Just be on the lookout for more information." So as soon as I hung up the phone, John, first and foremost, I said a quick prayer. And then I'm in the hallway just going off, just all excited, just celebrating, et cetera. Mind you, the time for me to get to graduation practice was dwindling down, and I lived off campus. So I had a lot to do in a very, small amount of time. But
Don't speed to get there now.
safety driving, John, safety
Right.
driving. But yeah, people in the hallway came out. It was just good. It was a good feeling. I remember having celebration tears in my eyes as I was driving to our graduation site for practice. And I remember saying to myself, if you think through the last 5 years, right? If you think through how quickly life changed for you and all the things that you had to deal with, could someone else walk in your shoes, right? Could someone else
Right.
have managed to come from where they came from, manage to keep their head, straight and eye on the prize and not get engaged and involved in the things that they did? Could they have made it through the type of household, that was there and still been able to come out with their head high? Could they have gone through, 4 years of high school and wanting to maintain as high as a GPA as possible and graduating top 10 just for things to take a sharp turn left?
That's
And
right.
over the last 5 years, go through everything that they've gone through and still stand here today. That was the first time in a very long time where I felt like I needed to pat myself on the back because I deserved it, right? I felt like this wasn't given to me. I felt like the risk that I took in hindsight wasn't a risk. It was just literally just me being myself and being okay with what the outcome was going to be. Some people will say it's a risk, John. And in other instances, for me, I looked at it as that underdog mentality. And that is when that underdog mentality, as far as my career, really started kicking in, because I said to myself, it's go time. You're going to enjoy these next couple of months of freedom. And then it's off to being a real adult, right? It's off to going out here and paying your own bills on your own, paying your own rent on your own, and really trying to establish yourself in this society, right? And trying to go out there and build whatever the American dream is that you think the American dream is for yourself.
So your story is definitely a story of overcoming adversity, and that's what this podcast is all about. And a couple of lessons that I took just from your interview process that I think is powerful and that others can learn from. The first is obviously be authentic. That's your superpower. And the ability to tell a story beats out any other way to express yourself that's out there. And we all
Mm-hmm.
know that, especially in sales.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to apply for a job where all the boxes aren't checked.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people of color, women, feel that if they are applying for a job, they have to have every criteria filled in order to even think about applying for that job. While others, they just go for it. And so
Mm-hmm.
the advice here, I think, is just go for it, tell your story. And a lot of people who are recruiting are willing to develop folks to bring them in and have them be successful in the position they're applying for.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, just be fearless. And that's what you showed, that you were fearless in going there. I always say the best interview you have is for the job that you don't really need, or maybe you think you can't get, so you have nothing to lose.
The worst thing that can happen is you actually get the job.
Right.
A lot of people kind of go into, just in general, things in life automatically assuming that I'm not going to get this thing that I really want, or I'm not deserving of this thing that I'm going after, etc. And I'm one of those people that I feel like the opposite, right? I sometimes get nervous by knowing that something actually is going to happen. And so for me, I'm like, okay, great. It's here. It's happening. I'll figure it out, along the way. Right. And so that's what I felt like when it came down to interviewing for this job. That's what I've felt like, my entire life when it's come down to certain things. The worst thing that can happen is you actually get it. And then you go out there and you figure it out once you get your body in that seat, or you get your body in whatever the situation is. We've got to put on that mentality that we are deserving of XYZ, regardless of what the standards say, regardless of what the criteria says, regardless of what someone says. If you feel down deep in your heart that you are deserving of something, put your best foot forward and act as though it is yours. And regardless if you get it or you don't get it, there's always a lesson to be learned along the way. And going through that process, John, plus a bunch of other things that have transpired since, going through that process here at Cisco, that has been a part of the narrative of my career journey. The worst thing that can happen is you actually get the job, and then you got to figure it out. And so every time I've gone after a leadership role, that's what I've said to myself. I've always been the underdog in every single interview process I've gone through. Whether it's because of my age, I typically was always younger than most going through it. I typically was always the woman who was going through it. And I typically was always the person of color who was going through it. And so when you automatically know the odds that are stacked up against you, those odds turn into challenges that turn into nothing but possibilities and greatness that can come from that. And because of such, that is why my mentality is always to be the worst thing that can happen is that you actually get it. Then you
That's
go
right.
figure it out once you're in that seat.
So I think there's two lessons here. So we talked about the lessons for the recruit, right? The person going for that job. We've been through those lessons, right? We talked about being fearless. We talked about telling your story, being authentic. But there's an important lesson here for the recruiter. And I think that's one of the most powerful lessons of this story as well, is the fact that you have to think differently when you
Mm-hmm.
recruit. There's this thing about these hard metrics. Oh, I need somebody with a 3.5 or a
Mm-hmm.
4.0. Well, if you don't dig deep into, well, why does that person have that 2.7 and what did they need to do to overcome to even get that
Mm-hmm.
2.7 and have that 2.7 in context? Maybe they had a 4.0 the first year and a 4.0 years 3 and 4, but there was some adversity that second year, family illness, anything could have happened. And you had a multitude of things that you needed to overcome that second year. So when you hear that story, then you're like, okay, this person here with this 2.7 has a lot more grit, determination, overcoming. That's what I really need for this job versus this person who has this 4.0 who just sailed through with no adversity.
Exactly.
So thinking
Exactly.
differently about how you recruit and really digging in to the stories of the people that you're looking to hire makes you have much more better decisions than if you don't do that.
That's a word, John. That is a word. That is, I actually just had this conversation recently this week in regards to how we need to think differently in regards to our Black talent in particular, right? I
Yeah.
can't speak for everyone, but I can speak about our Black talent. Our Black talent, regardless of whatever the industry is, the vertical, regardless of whatever it is, because it's universal. It's a universal issue, if you will, that Black talent, especially coming out of college or wherever they're coming from, are automatically feeling as though the cards are stacked against them. And because of such, are not getting the same opportunities or approaching that opportunity the same way as they would their peers that are part of the majority. And so when I am coaching and I am mentoring Black talent in particular, I am coaching and mentoring on them looking at the opportunity differently. I'm coaching and mentoring them in regards to getting prepared. I always tell them approach anything in life, especially when it comes down to an interview, as the pregame, the game, and the postgame. If you've ever played sports, in particular basketball, your coach always tells you you don't wait till the ball is in the air and the game is live to warm up, to get a good sweat in, to shake off the rust.
Mm-hmm.
You use the pregame, you use the warm up as that way to break a sweat. Use that as a way to shake off any of the nervousness or any of the kinks. You use that as your prep. Oftentimes, especially growing up, I'll put my hand up to say I was that person that didn't necessarily use warm ups as a way to really break a sweat. And then go figure, it took a period of time for me to really get mentally and physically into the game. But the more I started practicing that method and just in life, the more I started seeing that by the time a meeting started, I was ready to go, right? By the time an interview started, I was ready to go. I felt good about the situation enough that whatever happened is going to happen. And so that's what I tell my Black talent now,
Yeah. You got to
that
prep. Your prep was middle school and high school,
it
right?
was.
You
It,
killed it.
it it definitely was. It definitely was. And so by the time you get into college and you get into life, the prep is already there. Now you just got to go out there and practice what you've been taught. And so you're absolutely correct, man. I think that we don't see ourselves in certain situations, for one, because there's a lack of representation, but for two, because we see the criteria of whatever that thing is and automatically say, I don't qualify for that.
Right.
I don't fit that profile. I don't have those boxes that I check. And because of such, we I would say automatically, X ourselves out of even being in the running. The second part to that is, okay, you know what? Regardless if I check the boxes or don't check the boxes, I'm still going to apply because I feel as though I would be a good candidate. Okay, well, why? Right? What are the things that you're doing in a pre warm up? Right? Are you having conversations? Are you doing your research in regards to the job, the people on a team? Is this something that you really want? Right? I think that's the other part. We see some of these jobs and so we see some of these situations, some of these companies, but we're not really asking the questions in regards to the culture.
Right.
We're not really asking the questions that are going to be pivotal for us as being part of the Black community and trying to break barriers into these situations. We got to do our homework on them just as much as they're doing their homework on us. And by doing all those different things, John, you're then able to craft a story. You're able to have a foundation in place of what you could presume you are walking into and how you intertwine into what you potentially are trying to walk yourself into. I'll give you a quick story. My second leadership job at Cisco was a job that I knew I was overqualified for. It was a job that I knew a bulk of the customers because they came from my prior region.
Hmm.
I knew some of the team because I actually had helped them get promoted into those roles. I knew the hiring manager because of prior things, but I still had that little inkling, that little spider sense that said, you still got to do your warm up, right? You still got to go out there and do all the different things because you need to be able to tell a story. You need to be able to tell a story as to why you are not only qualified for this job, but why you're qualified for a promotion within this interview process if you get this job.
Yeah.
Meaning the job was listed as a grade 11. I was overqualified and was ready for a grade 12. And
Hmm.
so I needed to go through the interview process and show them that. What came out of it is that I was the number one candidate, thankfully, and the number one candidate also got accepted into a grade 12 role. And so I tell people that story as well because at the end of the day, I could have just walked in like I gave you the story of when I was in high school and playing basketball, thinking that we good. We don't need to warm up. This is gonna be for us. We're going to
Right.
win this game, and approached it in a way where I approach everything in life. You've got to go through warm up. You've got to go through the rigors of such. You've got to do your homework. You've got to understand all the different aspects of this thing because you don't know what you don't know until you actually get in a role. So that's what I coach and mentor on. And thankfully, I've had some young knuckleheads that have listened, and it's great because thinking back to that interview process and going through the program, these are people who have walked the same shoes as me. These are people who have similar backgrounds, have similar stories, have stories of being the underdog, have stories of being the only, have stories of, coming from different places in life and then trying to figure out, how do they take those lessons and turn them into opportunities to be overcome. And so I latch on to those types because those are the types that usually technology companies and corporate America doesn't look at. They don't look at the ones that are slightly rough around the edges. But I feel as though those are the ones that also change the navigation of things because it shows that I can come somewhere and be myself, and it's absolutely okay. And when you have that one or two that are in a room that are okay with that, it allows everyone else to kind of lower their shoulders and relax their shoulders a little bit and just be themselves. And the most productive things come through when you have diversity in a room. Diversity in a room is not going to be there until everyone has the ability to just comfortably be themselves.
So what I love about your story, Vinaya, is the fact that you came through adversity, but you're imparting that wisdom and knowledge to others, right? And so
Mhm.
through your coaching, the lessons learned aren't stopping with you. So on that note, I want to just reflect back a little
Mhm.
bit on what we think the main turning points, influences, lessons learned that helped you on your path, as we say, to be an outlier and one who has achieved the level of success that you have. Now, I usually make a list after these interviews, and you got a significant list here, but I'm going to try and go through it quickly just to get your feedback. So, we start out with the fact that you're an Air Force brat. And given that environment that you grew up of having to move around, you had to learn to adapt, and you turned that into a strength. You had the military structure that your parents imparted, gave you discipline. You had the car accident, gave you perspective.
Mm.
Your parents told you had to work hard to get ahead, and that made you independent and strong. You had your angel. Everybody's got an angel in their story. Yet you had your Black teacher, Mrs. Jones,
Mhm.
that recognized your talent. She wanted to accelerate you in the work that you did So she gave you the challenges in life that you stood up and accepted. You had the incident on the bus with your sister. You guys had to stand up for yourselves. You gathered your strength and inspiration from your grandmother. You know, she co-signed on that loan. She didn't have to do that. So, you had basketball, school, church. You said that was your outlet, right? When your parents were going through it. So it's important to be able to find that outlet. You had the recreation center as well, which was your outlet. And, you know, one of the most powerful lessons in this whole story that I get is that Cisco interview, that you can recover, right? That first time you went, we didn't get into that part of the story that much, but that first time you interviewed didn't go so well. You reset and came back. That's resiliency, right? And you learned, part of your story that we learned was your strength, your ability to tell a story, and authenticity is in fact your superpower. And you taught the recruiters not to judge a book by just one metric. You got to look at the whole person. So that's what I got out of your story. There's a lot of stuff there. You think I missed anything?
I don't think you did, John. I think you summarized it so well that I might ask you to just record that all over again and send it to me.
You're going to have to record it. That's what we're doing here.
Just in the event I'm asked again to tell a story, just here's a clip. Listen to my friend John. He does a great, quick synopsis of it. But that is absolutely correct, John. I think that there's nothing that's missing there. If I were to summarize it, it would definitely be in that way.
Where I like to end is, if you were to meet your younger self, what advice would you give to your younger self, or folks, young people who might find themselves in a similar circumstance?
Yeah. What I always like to tell them, and I also to this day remind myself, is that embrace and enjoy the journey versus always looking forward to the destination.
I like that.
I have that tagline in like my little captions and things like that, because growing up, because of everything that you just said in regards to the synopsis and the summary, I always looked at the destination. I always said to myself, when I get to that point, I'm going to rest. I'm going to, reboot, decompress, et cetera, before I go off and look at the next thing. And what I recognized is that as soon as I got to the next thing, I was off running and never really took time out to think back. Never really took time out to just think about the different things and challenges I had to overcome, the lessons learned, and then what could I pull away from the list of lessons and challenges overcome to make sure that I'm prepared for the next time that happens within the next chapter. I never took the time out to smell the roses during each journey. But what I do say to those that I coach and mentor, and what I always try to remember about my younger self, is that my younger self unknowingly was built for the journey. And my younger self was built for the challenges. My younger self was a person that didn't know what she knew was going to happen, but she knew that if she could just embrace the challenges that a lot of people choose to shy away from, that the journey was going to be good. And so now when I look at it and when I tell, others, and then think about the question that you just asked, embrace the journey. It's the journey over the destination. The destination is going to be there, but embrace the ride. Hang on tight, because it's going to be a sticky one. It's going to be a bumpy one, but it's going to be a good one, an enjoyable one.
So with that, I think that's a great place to pause and wrap up. Embrace the journey. And that's what this is all about. Inspiring paths to success. It's all about the journey. And how do you reach that outlier status to become successful? So with that, that's the story of Vinaya Springer. What I've learned from all of these inspiring stories is that none of these journeys are traveled alone. There's a lot of support along the way, whether it be individuals like Grandma, Mrs. Jones, organizations like the Rec Center, school, and church. Sometimes it's just a little bit of luck, surviving a car accident, That whole saying of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, please, we know that really doesn't exist and it can't be done. It takes a community. It also requires the persistence and tenacity, which Vinaya has obviously shown, and the desire to succeed and overcome. So thanks for listening, and I hope you were able to get something out of this conversation that you can use in your life or inspire you to help someone else in theirs. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who you think might benefit. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, Vinaya.
No, thank you.